Good evening. Tonight, I wanted to talk to you about science and the scientific method and different scientific disciplines and how they pertain to the cryptozoological world. And crypto meaning hidden and zoological meaning animals, the study of hidden animals. And also in a broader sense, how it relates to paranormal subjects in general, whether people are into ghost hunting, or people are into ufology, UFOs, or whatever they're into that is generally not accepted by modern science, by modern researchers. Now, when we think of science, a lot of times the first thing that comes to our brain is some guy in a lab coat looking at samples, maybe working on a cure for a disease, maybe analyzing DNA, breaking something down. And, that is true. Laboratory work is a very big part of science, and science is all around us. Science is kind of the scientific method, being very rational thought. We can see it, we can touch it, it exists. This is really inbred into us, especially in our modern society. And then we look at some of the different life sciences. Some of the more fascinating things that I think pertain to us is if you look at Jane Goodall's work when she went to Gombe to study the chimpanzees. She had no idea what to expect. It was basically trailblazing. I mean, people had photographed them, but no one had gone out and interacted them, become part of the troupe, observed their behaviors, realized how intelligent these creatures were. We just thought of them as some kind of a big monkey. We didn't really realize how close or how smart they were. And her work was absolutely trailblazing and amazing. In fact, I think one of her earliest encounters when she was out there, a male chimpanzee hit her over the head with a rock. And you also look at like Diane Fossey, what she did with the mountain gorillas. Very similar to Jane Goodall, but a different animal, different type of society, and how shy and gentle these big creatures are. So I think we need to look at a lot of this kind of stuff and how they approach it. And when people talk about Bigfoot and habituation, you got to remember that these aren't mountain gorillas exactly. These aren't chimpanzees exactly. These aren't bears, which are, I give Sasquatch far more intelligence than the average bears. And bears are pretty smart for an animal. Because bears can be very dangerous. They can kill and eat people. They can attack people. They can be very defensive. But they can also be very curious and very strong and mischievous at the same time. So you got to look at, studying dangerous creatures like bears, studying intelligent creatures like chimpanzees, studying very shy, mysterious creatures like mountain gorillas, all of which can be dangerous. And kind of think about this a little bit when you're going out in the woods. How would these people approach it, scientific method? But it's very hard with Sasquatch because Sasquatch seems to be very actively trying not to engage us and trying to hide versus just being very secluded species. Now, something else I find is very fascinating, and I've always had a personal fascination, is uncontacted tribes, whether it's deep in the Amazon or very secluded tribes that just don't have a lot of contact. And there are some tribes that have never really had contact with the outside world. Look up the North Sentinelese Island. That's where that missionary went missing a few months back and wound up dead. And one thing that you find with these uncontacted tribes is that they usually respond with quite a bit of hostility to outsiders. Now, I don't know if in the past other outsiders have abducted their kind, or they have seen outsiders hunting, or, we come flying over in a helicopter and a plane and we have clothes on and they don't have the same kind of clothes, and we have weapons that make loud noises and fire, things that they just don't understand exactly what's going on. So of course they're going to meet it with a little bit of hostility. So when we talk about scientific research and evidence and supporting evidence for Sasquatch as a species, and not just trying to prove the existence of Sasquatch, but trying to understand more about them and why they do the things they do. The whole name of Bigfoot came from the large prints that they left. They looked like somewhat human prints, but were very, very big, hence the name Bigfoot. And there are a few really good scientists out there, really good researchers, professors. Dr. Jeff Meldrum, he does a lot of work on anatomy of their footprints and track cast and he's written whole books about it. He does a lot of good stuff on his website. Not not a PhD scientist, but Cliff Barackman from Finding Bigfoot. He does a whole good thing about Bigfoot handcast. Everybody does footcast. He does handcast and the morphology of their hands. And like I said, Meldrum did a really good job in some of the presentations I've seen of taking educated guess at their anatomy and their bone structure and how they're different from humans and how they're different from primates. But some of their similarities and maybe how they're built, just all in the way they're walking and their locomotion and what their footprints say about how these creatures walk. And then when you start looking at other tracks, other prints left in the snow, misidentification of known animals, especially snow is really a hard one because snow kind of melts and a track can deform. Then you get tracks in the sand that maybe look like the one you see here, a giant dog track. But, maybe most canines don't usually get that huge. Could it be like a cougar track? But then that cougars, their claws retract. And then you're just trying to figure out what you're looking at. And if you can go into the realm of possibility that Bigfoot exists, some kind of really reclusive human offset species, some kind of a half primate, half human species that's very intelligent and actively hides from people. And then occasionally you get a hair sample. And I've talked before about sending in hair samples to labs, is they compare it to known species. So if you really did come across actual Sasquatch hair and you sent it in, it would come back as unknown. Or sometimes they say it's, very close to human, but not quite human. But most of the time they compare it to known species. So they'd run it across, they'd ask you where you found it. And they say, oh, we found it in California, in the southern Sierra Nevadas. And they would compare it to bears and deer and everything else that lives there and say, well, does it match up with any of that? And then you look at other, more like a circumstantial evidence, if you want to get more in like a legal term, is in areas that have large amounts of Sasquatch sightings and footprints and encounter stories, you find these strange tree structures. It seems to be a whole phenomenon upon Bigfoot, and even to a lesser extent, some of these other cryptid creatures people are seeing. Large logs moved around, these teepee shapes. They're obviously not for any kind of like a shelter. They're not going to keep any kind of rain or snow or sun out or really even be any kind of a hunting blind. They seem to be something territorial. And then you start looking at areas, it's very obvious when you look at a map, areas that have a lot more sightings and encounters and evidence or strange howls or footprints, or where people go camping and food ends up missing. All the myriad of things that people have in the Bigfoot world as far as encounters, and you can plot that on maps and realize there are areas with hotspot activities, realize there are areas with less activity, spots with no activity, and you really start to think that these creatures, as phenomenal as it may seem, really do exist. But as far as scientific research goes, we do have a fossil record. We know there are other great apes besides humans. We know there are chimpanzees. We know there are gorillas. We know there are orangutans. We know through the fossil record that there are, from Homo erectus to Homo habilis, all the different pre-humans out there, to Homo heidelbergensis, a very strongly built type of pre-human. And, you look at Gigantopithecus, which was a huge ape. Now there's a lot of conjecture whether they walked upright or they walked more plantigrade or digigrade, or they walked on their knuckles, because they've only found a few teeth, but they know it was from a very large ape. And that's been a long-standing theory of Bigfoot, is some kind of a offshoot of the Gigantopithecus blacki. So that's just one of the theories. And when we look, there's a lot of science that crosses over here. And then we look at eyewitnesses encounters, people who didn't have a camera ready, and we look at descriptions, different regional descriptions. People reported Bigfoot in the south, but it's 7 or 8 feet tall, not quite as tall as the Pacific Northwest ones, and was a lot more excitable and looked a lot more like a chimpanzee. The ones in, Washington State looked more like a big gorilla. Some on the East Coast look a lot more human. Some, as crazy as it may sound, have a snout on them, and you think a snout on like a human or a Sasquatch? It's like, well, Look at a chimpanzee, or look at a mandrill. Look at a baboon. They have a protruding snout with big nasty teeth in it. So if people are reporting ones that look like a gorilla and some that look like a chimpanzee and ones that look like an orangutan and some that look more human but in different areas, then one without a snout or one with a snout would almost seem to kind of fit in with the different types. And then you have this whole other creature that isn't really part of the Sasquatch mystery, but is seen in a lot of the same areas and has gained a lot of popularity, and people are seeing him more and more, and that's this Dogman creature. And it's not like a humanoid creature or a Bigfoot with a snout. This is like an upright walking dog. And I know I've talked to a lot of people and gotten into arguments with them that, well, I believe Bigfoot because of the fossil record and all the scientific stuff, but an upright walking dog? Get out of here. There's nothing in the fossil record. There's nothing that supports an upright walking dog. And I go, yeah, I agree with you. We're on the same page. But people are seeing these things. And I'm not just talking one or two people. I'm talking thousands of people. We're talking all across the world. We're talking Native American beliefs and tribal beliefs all across the world. And people every day are seeing these creatures that can run on all four and stand and walk upright, but they're a 4 or 5 or 600 pound, 7 or 8, 9, 10 foot tall wolf creature. And then you get into areas of high strangeness. We've done a lot of that on this channel. That always been really interesting to me is specific areas that have like UFO, orbs, Bigfoot, areas of elevated paranormal activity, if you will. Like the Skinwalker Ranch is a very classic example, a very well-known internet story place of large wolves, Bigfoot-like creatures, poltergeist activity, disembodied voices, things being misplaced and moved around inexplicably, strange creatures. And Skinwalker Ranch is a really good point to make that science is good at answering most questions, but not all questions. And that's why the paranormal generally is what we consider outside of science, parapsychology being kind of a fringe science. We have to use science to answer these questions, but there's a certain point to where I think belief or disbelief, just because science can't explain something doesn't mean people aren't seeing something or it isn't real. There are many things in the universe that we can see and observe that we don't quite understand. So I wanted to get that across to people, is that, well, I don't believe this or I don't believe that because there's no scientific evidence for it. And I say, something's really going on. Something's leaving tracks. Something's leaving prints. People are seeing it. People are hearing howls. People are catching glimpses on tapes and on videos. And I know science doesn't make any sense of it, but it doesn't mean it's not happening. And so I want you guys to just think about that. Science is a great tool, but I think in a lot of, especially when you're dealing with the paranormal, it goes about 80% of the way, especially when you get into ghost hunting. That's a whole other thing. I mean, there's way less physical stuff going on there than there is in the cryptozoological world. So I want you guys to think about science, but take science with a grain of salt when it comes to explaining anything in the paranormal realm. Thank you very much, and stay safe out there, folks. People are really seeing something, and take care of yourself.